Good morning, everybody. Today we're going to start a really interesting series, three-parter, on the Bethlehem 10-inch series. It's a very interesting chapter in their history, and possibly one of their greatest moments. It overlaps with the BCP series in 55 and 6, but definitely they started off in the 10-inch thing first, as was the norm in the industry at that point. First of all, Pistol Pete Maravich. This is from the New Orleans Jazz, who moved to Utah eventually, and why they didn't change their name to anything other than the Utah Jazz is beyond my comprehension. There's places in the world less jazzy than Utah, but not a lot. Not many. I mean, you could have come up with the rock formations, the land bridges, something over there in Utah, continental divides. Come up with something. But jazz, Utah? Anyway, Pistol Pete was bad. And one of these basketball shares with jazz is improvisation. You know, it's not nearly as scripted as a pitcher and a catcher or as a football play. It's very much an improvisation based on those around you, those against you. It's an art form in that sense. But enough about basketball. Bethlehem. Gus Wilde, as we talked about in part 1 and 2 in the Bethlehem series back in season 1 and 2. I was a Swiss immigrant. Decided he wanted to get into the music business. He starts out trying to do pop records. Doesn't have much success. A young Creed Taylor, fresh out of the military, decided he didn't want to be a doctor, what he got to school for, and told his parents he wanted to be a jazz musician. He was a drummer. He moved to the city, New York, and he decides that he wants to produce jazz records. And he convinces Gus Wilde at Bethlehem, who's struggling with the pop market, not really connecting, not really having any hits at all, to allow Bethlehem to be a jazz imprint. It was a deft move on their part. Chris Connor comes over almost right away, who goes back into the 40s. They should record with Decca a little bit. They have fairly good success right off the bat with this first 10-inch. Chris Connor sings the lullabies of Birdland, and it's got a nice little backing band on it. Ellis Larkins, Everett Barksdale, and Beverly Parr on bass. This was recorded in New York City in August of 51. I'm going to give you some of the information for a purpose here because it shifts to LA at some point, and then you can really feel the difference in what Bethlehem is doing. Another really interesting and important point here is that cover. That wasn't the standard for 1954. Covers looked like this. That could be selling you soap. That could be selling you bacon, shaving powder. What are we selling here? Look at the graphic, look at the layout of it. It was a commercial selling a product. That's how they wrapped records. Glenn Miller, look how that's sold to you. Am I buying ginger ale? Am I buying mattresses? I'm not sure what I'm purchasing here. Turned out it was music. And that was kind of the norm across the industry in the 7-inch era. The 78 era didn't really have picture sleeves. They had the paper label sleeves. And the 45 and early 10-inch era was not very well illustrated whatsoever. And along comes Bethlehem, and that's their 7 inches. So even their 7-inch EPs and their 10-inch were given really beautiful, lush treatment, photographs. We're going to dig more into the art as we go forward. And a very important aspect of the Bethlehem art department was a guy they hired named Bert Goldblatt, a great illustrator, and made a lot of great album covers for Bethlehem. So Bethlehem has pretty good success with this early Chris Connor. So they followed up almost immediately, like within weeks. They record this session with the Vinnie Burke trio. And that has Joe Cinderella on a guitar, kind of a guy that's underappreciated as a jazz guitarist. I don't think he has a whole lot of albums as a leader even, but he's on a lot of great side work. Again, we're talking August 21st of 54 in New York City. This was recorded. Another beautiful cover. Same as that 7-inch actually, if you look at it. So again, you can see that the art department here really is starting to say something. And they were accused by some other label executive of, what are you trying to be? Someone who sells images, photographs? This is the music business. You know, what are you doing? Gus Wilde wasn't deterred, thank goodness. And they're going to go on to kind of really set the standard for a lot of what's fantastic about jazz album art. This next one is Bethlehem 1003. So there was the 2 Chris Connors, and then this was the 3rd one they reissued. And this has a great band on it as well. Again, recorded in New York in 54 in September. Julius Watkins and Charlie Rouse are on this, who would become Les Modes, of course, and Rouse eventually working with Monk for quite a long time. Duke Jordan's on the piano, and Ron Jefferson. And the other important thing about this is Creed Taylor was very instrumental in these records at Bethlehem in 54. These 10 inches. He's there from the beginning, and he was part of the force that convinced Wilde to make it not a pop label, make it a jazz label. And Creed Taylor had fairly specific interest in what he wanted from his jazz labels. He didn't want it to be the Norman Grands long jam sessions full of, you know, super long solos. He wanted more concise, marketable, accessible jazz. And one of the issues I want to raise in this episode is, are white people capable of playing jazz? And the answer, of course, is yes. White people are capable of playing a great deal of incredible jazz. The thing that's going to be different is you can make Chinese food here in America, but because of the local grains, the local water, the local yeast, the local seasonings, there's going to be a different take on it. And like you can only comment on your experience with what you cook from the local region you live in, much the same way you can only emote from your experience in your own life as a jazz musician. You can't fake with words your gangster experience as a white jazz player. You can only express what you know, whether that's the Ivy League or whether that's a difficult level of poverty, which a lot of white Americans still lived in. But anyway, Pettiford, one of the most important jazz players, bass players of this era, really innovative, really spry, lovely light touch that can bounce around the fretboard on the bass. Pettiford died much too young, but he made some great records on ABC as well. He has another one coming up in this series eventually here. So look for Oscar Pettiford. Number 4 in the series, we're going to kind of cover the first 12 in this episode. Is Bethlehem 1004, Great Scott, and it's the Great Bobby Scott Trio with Wiley Mitchell and Bill Bradley Jr. And again, we're here in New York City. Again, we're talking Creed Taylor. Scott played with Louis Prima, Lester Young, and Gene Krupa, so he had quite a pedigree. But he also was a great arranger and songwriter, composition guy. He could play the piano, the vibes. Interesting player. His records aren't that hard to find or that expensive. Look for these. If you see them, they're worth having. I enjoy them both. Ruby Braf, number 1005 in this series. Again, cool album cover. It's not really selling a product. It's got an incredible amount of people swinging on swing sets. Again, a New York recording. Creed Taylor was involved again with this one. Jack Teagarden, of course, who Louis Armstrong played with a great deal, coined Ruby Braf as the Ivy League Armstrong. And he plays in the tradition of Lewis and Bix Beiderbecke, and a lot of fire, a lot of fury, a lot of enunciation. Ruby Braf has 3 10 inches in this series, which will be the guy with the most. He goes on to have a long recording career with Epic, Columbia, other places. Braf's a great player, and don't ignore his recordings. Now, another record I love dearly in this series is this Hank D'Amico record, and he was a clarinetist. Now, I played that a lot at my jazz brunch at the Red Cow in Minneapolis. That's got a great energy, a great hook to it. Artie Shaw would be proud of that. Just digs. It just swings. You know, it's got a light buoyancy to it. Again, a lot of these are white cats. A lot of these guys are players from the Goodman Orchestra and that realm of player. And as the 50s kind of dawn, we start moving into the smaller groups. And Bethlehem was looking for artists, and so they were attracting a lot of these guys, like Aaron Sachs and Hank D'Amico, and really solid stuff. Well, one of the great unheralded trumpet players of that era was a guy by the name of Charlie Shavers, and this is Horn of Plenty, number 1007. Benny Moulton, Hank D'Amico, Panama Francis is on the drums. Charlie Shavers played with Dizzy Gillespie, Nat King Cole, played with Billie Holiday. He's got a great pedigree. Again, he's got some of the fire of Armstrong, the enunciation and tone of Armstrong. You can find his records surprisingly cheap. Sadly, he kind of got pushed into the easy listening thing, and by the 60s he's making some kind of more commercialized stuff, but certainly worth following up on as Charlie Shavers. Aaron Sachs, we're looking at now number 1008 in the Bethlehem 10-inch series. Irby Green's on this, Barry Galbraith, Ozzie Johnson, another Goodman protege, another clarinetist. He married Helen Merrill at some point. I'm just trying to give you a little information on some of these artists. Nice little cover, again, Burt Goldblatt. You know, they lay the little text there in the bell of his clarinet. These records are bumping. The records bounce along with a lot of fire and juice. And there's a second one with Bobby Scott. Another great cover. Got some maps of the East Coast there and some pictures of those guys in the studio. Again, we're still in New York City being recorded here. Eddie Bird is on this, the trombone player. Hal McHugh's the great alto player. Milt Hinton, Ozzie Johnson. Again, Creed Taylor. And so you're seeing Creed Taylor's coda, his message, his modus operandi is what I'm trying to say, very early on. Very polished, well-produced sessions that are going to have a cohesiveness from the onset. They're not going to just be random songs strewn together. They're going to be kind of a cohesive set and be prepared as an album, which in those days a lot of albums were just called singles from 45s and outtakes. These were records that were made as entities. And that's an important step in the album process. A guy that's really unheralded and probably deserves more credit than he gets is a fantastic bass player by the name of Vinnie Burke. Another white cat. He has a couple of great records on ABC. He played with a lot of important players over the years. I very much enjoy this Vinnie Burke record. Again, nice, wonderful cover, nice photograph. This is not the norm in 10 inches in any kind of genre. You know, jazz, country, doesn't matter. This was a new development, an artistic presentation like that. I want to stress that all these early recordings here with Creed Taylor are all done on the East Coast. So they're all East Coast sessions, recorded in New York in 54, a few in 53, I think, a few in 55. Number 1011 in this series is a guy we don't hear much about, a guy by the name of Pete Brown. Another beautiful cover. And Joe Wilder's on this one. Pete Brown plays the alto, of course, a Baltimore native. He played at Newport with Coleman Hawkins and Eldridge. He's a great player from the swing era, who's kind of a forgotten guy. Plays quite a bit of fire. Of course, Parker influenced him like he did with everybody else in this time frame. And then last but not least in this first episode is number 1012. Joe Puma, the great guitar player, an Italian, again on the East Coast. We're recording this. Don Elliott, the multi-instrumentalist, is on this. Elliott can play anything from vibes to trumpet to piano to sing. Vinnie Berg shows up on this as well. A guy that was born and bred in New York City. And most of the great jazz players migrate to New York. Not a lot of the greats were from New York, which is weird. There are some, but it's not like the list of guys you get from Detroit or Philadelphia or DC or the South. New York seems to be a destination place and a place where you want to arrive at. But the born, raised, lived, and died New Yorker jazz player, not as common as I would have thought when I looked into that. Again, Creed Taylor. So it's pretty clear where Creed Taylor's heart and visions are at. I enjoy everything in this early part of this Bethlehem series. It cooks. And we're going to talk more about all this in the next episode, part 2. And again, the question is, can white cats play? And we're going to get back to that in the next episode. Thanks a lot. Peace.